When we were kicked out on my 18th birthday, my sister and I had nothing left but a rusty key to a derelict barn. What we found locked inside, sealed since 1962, would save our lives and force us to confront a family legacy we never knew existed. If you've ever felt like the world was closing in on you, stick around. This story is for you. And if you feel like sharing that journey, hit subscribe, because we're building a community for people who get it. The sound of a deadbolt sliding home is a sound of finality. It's not loud, not like a slamming door or a raised voice. It's a quiet mechanical click that separates the world into two distinct parts, the inside and the outside. On my 18th birthday, my sister Maya and I found ourselves on the outside. The air was cold for late October, the kind of damp chill that seeps right through your jacket and settles in your bones. It smelled like wet pavement and dying leaves. We stood on the cracked concrete porch of the only home we'd known for the last 6 years, holding our lives in a collection of black trash bags. Mark, our stepfather, didn't yell. He wasn't the yelling type. His cruelty was colder, more efficient. He stood on the other side of the screen door, a vague, shadowy shape in the warm light of the entryway. "You're 18 now, Leo," he had said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. He'd been holding a piece of paper, some official-looking document he'd probably printed off the internet. "Legally, you're an adult. You're no longer my financial or legal responsibility." He looked past me to my sister Maya, who was 14 and trying very hard to look like she wasn't about to cry. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides. "She's your blood," Mark continued, his gaze flicking back to me. "She goes with you. The state can sort it out if you can't handle it." And that was it. 2 years of taking care of our mother as she got sick. 2 years of me working a part-time job after school to help with bills he claimed he couldn't pay. 2 years of being the man of the house because he never was, and it all ended with a quiet click. The deadbolt. We weren't a family being broken, we were a liability being discharged. He watched us for a moment through the screen, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked deeper into the house, disappearing from view. The light in the entryway went out. We stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. The rhythmic drip of water from a clogged gutter was the only sound. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. She was clutching the strap of her backpack so tightly her knuckles were white. She wouldn't look at the house. She just stared straight ahead, at the dark street. "What do we do, Leo?" she asked, her voice small, a tiny crack in the composure she was fighting so hard to maintain. It was the question that had been screaming in my own head for the past hour. What do we do? I had $112 in my wallet from my last paycheck at the diner, a beat-up cell phone with a cracked screen and 17% battery, and a sister whose entire world now rested on my barely 18-year-old shoulders. We had no family to call. Our mom was gone. Our grandparents were long gone. It was just us. I forced a breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I had to be the adult. That's what Mark said. That's what the date on the calendar said. I had to act like one. "We go to the bus station," I said, my voice sounding rougher, more certain than I felt. "We'll figure it out from there." I picked up 2 of the trash bags. They were heavy, clumsy. Everything we owned, reduced to cheap plastic sacks that threatened to tear. "Come on, May." She didn't move for a second. Then she took a deep, shuddering breath, hitched her own bag higher on her shoulder, and followed me down the porch steps and onto the sidewalk. We didn't look back. Looking back felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. The walk to the downtown bus terminal was 3 miles. Each step felt like it was taking us further away from the world we knew and deeper into a vast, terrifying unknown. The trash bags bumped against my legs, a constant, lumpy reminder of our homelessness. The bus station was a purgatory of fluorescent lights, disinfectant, and quiet desperation. People slept on the hard plastic chairs, their faces slack with exhaustion. A television in the corner played a muted news report about things that felt like they were happening on another planet. We found a pair of empty seats against a cold tile wall and set our bags down around us like a fortress. Maya immediately curled into herself, pulling her knees to her chest and resting her head on her backpack. She was pretending to sleep, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I sat beside her, the protector of a kingdom of 2 people and 4 trash bags. I pulled out my wallet, not to count the money again. I knew the number down to the cent, but to feel like I was doing something. And that's when my fingers brushed against it. A small, thick envelope tucked into a flap I rarely used. It was heavy for its size, the paper old and creamy, slightly yellowed at the edges. My mom had given it to me about a year before she passed. Her hands had been trembling, her voice thin as paper. "This was your grandfather's," she'd whispered, pressing it into my hand. "His last resort. He told me to give it to one of you, if you ever had no other choice. Absolutely no other choice, Leo. Promise me." I had promised, and then I'd forgotten about it, tucking it away as a relic of a strange, sad conversation. Now, sitting under the buzzing lights of a bus station at 2 in the morning, it felt like we had finally run out of choices. I carefully worked my thumbnail under the flap. It wasn't sealed with glue, but with a brittle, faded wax stamp that crumbled under the pressure. Inside were 2 items. The first was an old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate, the kind you see in movies about castles. It was tarnished with age, a deep green patina creeping over the intricate head. The second was a piece of paper, folded into a tight square. It was a deed. The paper was thick, almost like cloth, and the text was a mix of elegant cursive and blocky typewritten letters. It was a deed for 40 acres of land and all structures thereon in a place called Sparrow Creek County. The name on the deed was Arthur Miller, my grandfather, my mom's dad. He had died before I was born. At the bottom, a single, shaky line of handwritten ink, a note scrawled on the back. It read, "Under the grinding stone, barn number 2. I stared at it, my heart starting to beat a little faster. A key, a deed, a cryptic message. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't a home, but it was something. It was more than the $112 and the 17% battery. It was a direction. "Maya," I whispered, nudging her gently. She opened her eyes, they were red-rimmed. "Look." I showed her the key and the deed. She sat up, her weariness momentarily forgotten. She took the key, her small fingers tracing its strange shape. "Grandpa Arthur's?" she asked. I nodded. "Mom gave it to me. She said it was a last resort." Maya looked from the key to me, and for the first time since the deadbolt clicked shut, I saw a flicker of something other than fear in her eyes. It was a tiny spark, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. "Hope." "Is it real?" she whispered. "A real place?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But it's the only place we've got." I walked over to the ticket counter, where a woman with tired eyes sat behind a pane of scratched plexiglass. "2 tickets to Sparrow Creek," I said, trying to sound like I knew what I was doing. She stared at me blankly. "There's no bus to Sparrow Creek. Hasn't been for 20 years. I can get you to Oak Haven. It's the county seat. From there, you're on your own." It was the best we were going to get. I slid most of my money under the glass. 2 tickets to Oak Haven, then. The tickets she printed out felt like a death sentence and a winning lottery ticket all at once. The bus left at 6:05 a.m. We had 4 hours to wait. I settled back into my chair next to Maya, the heavy brass key cold in my palm. We were no longer just running away from something. We were running toward it. The bus ride was a long, slow crawl through a gray dawn. I watched the familiar landscape of the city suburbs flatten into strip malls, then into wide, empty-looking farmland. Maya fell into a real sleep this time, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing deep and even. For a few hours, she just looked like a kid again, not a refugee. I stayed awake, my mind racing. I was responsible for her. The thought was a physical weight. Every decision I made, every dollar I spent, every wrong turn I took, it wasn't just me it affected. It was her, too. I felt a surge of cold anger toward Mark, a useless, petty man who had shed his responsibilities like an old coat. Then I felt a deeper, hollower anger at the universe, at the sickness that had taken our mom and left us in this mess. But anger didn't help. It was a useless fuel. I let it burn out, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of our situation. All we had was a key, a cryptic note, and a destination we knew nothing about. Oakhaven wasn't so much a town as a wide spot in the road with a post office, a gas station, and a diner called the Rusty Spoon. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of the gas station, and we stepped out into air that smelled of pine and damp earth. It was quiet, unsettlingly quiet after the constant hum of the city. An old man in overalls was slowly filling a canister with gasoline. He watched us with undisguised curiosity as we wrestled our trash bags off the bus. "That's all you got?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I nodded. "We're looking for a property," I said. "Out in Sparrow Creek, the old Miller place." The man stopped pumping gas and squinted at me. He had pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than you wanted them to. "Arthur Miller," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "Haven't heard that name in 30 years. Thought the bank or some company took that land ages ago." My heart sank. "You know where it is?" "Sure," he said, screwing the cap back on his canister. "It's about 5 miles down that road." He pointed to a narrow asphalt lane that disappeared into a thick stand of trees. "Road turns to gravel after a mile, then to dirt. The house collapsed years ago. Barns are probably still standing, though. Nothing out there but rot and memories." He looked at Maya, then back at me. A flicker of something, maybe pity, crossed his face. "You kids got a place to stay tonight?" "We're fine," I said, a little too quickly. "The barn is where we're headed." He just nodded slowly, as if he'd heard this kind of foolishness before. "Watch for snakes," was all he said before getting into his ancient, rust-pocked pickup truck and driving away. 5 miles. It didn't sound like much, but with our bags and the growing afternoon heat, it felt like 100. The man was right. The road dissolved from pavement to a washboard of gravel, and finally to 2 dirt ruts overgrown with weeds. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a long green tunnel. It felt like we were walking into another time. The silence was absolute, broken only by the buzz of insects and the crunch of our footsteps. Maya was quiet, her earlier spark of hope dimming with every mile. The trash bags were a nightmare, constantly snagging on thorns and splitting at the seams. I had to stop twice to redistribute our clothes into the sturdier backpack. We were tired, we were thirsty, and we were walking toward a ruin. The hope I'd clung to was starting to feel thin and brittle, like the old deed in my pocket. And then, the trees opened up, and we saw it. The property. The gas station man hadn't been exaggerating. The farmhouse was a skeleton. The roof had caved in, taking the second story with it. The porch sagged at a drunken angle, and the windows were dark, empty eyes. The fields on either side of the long, unkempt driveway were a sea of waist-high weeds and thorny bushes. It was a place of profound neglect. My first thought was, this was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. But then I saw them. Further back, past the carcass of the house, stood two barns. One was leaning precariously, its siding stripped away by weather, but the other, the larger one, looked solid. Its roofline was straight, and while the paint was peeling, the structure itself seemed intact. Barn number 2. I looked at Maya. She was staring at the wreck of the house, her face ashen. "It's okay," I said, trying to sound confident. "We're not staying in the house. We're here for the barn." I shifted the weight of the bags on my shoulders and started walking up the driveway, the weeds grabbing at my ankles. The air grew still and heavy as we approached the buildings. We passed the first barn. It was a lost cause, the inside open to the sky, filled with debris. But the second one, barn number 2, was different. It was built from thick, heavy timbers, and a massive sliding door was held shut by a heavy chain and a padlock that was almost black with rust. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It felt warm from my body heat. With trembling hands, I inserted it into the padlock. For a heart-stopping second, it wouldn't turn. I felt a surge of panic. But then I jiggled it, pushed it in harder, and with a grating screech of metal on metal, the lock clicked open. The chain fell away with a heavy clank. It took both of us leaning our full weight against the massive door to get it to budge. It slid open a few feet with a deep groan, kicking up a cloud of dust and revealing a slice of perfect, still darkness within. The air that wafted out was thick and musty, the smell of ages. It smelled of motor oil, dry hay, and something else. The scent of a place that had been sealed away from the world. We stepped across the threshold, out of the sunlight and into the gloom. Inside, it was like stepping into a photograph from another era. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light slanting down from a grimy window high in the rafters. The barn was huge, much bigger than it looked from the outside. Tools of every shape and size hung in neat, orderly rows on the walls, each one silhouetted in a thick coat of dust and cobwebs. There was a workbench that ran the entire length of one wall, covered in jars of screws and nails, oil cans, and the ghostly outlines of projects long since abandoned. A heavy canvas tarp was draped over a large object in the center of the room, which I realized was an old tractor. It was a workshop, perfectly preserved. A time capsule, and in the far corner, half hidden in shadow, was a massive, waist-high grinding stone wheel mounted on a heavy wooden frame. "Under the grinding stone," I whispered, the words feeling strange in the profound silence. Maya was already there, her fingers tracing the rough, circular edge of the stone. "It must weigh a ton, Leo." It did. We tried to push it, but it wouldn't budge. It was an artifact, anchored to the spot. But the note didn't say, "Move the stone," just under it. I got down on my hands and knees, my phone's flashlight cutting a sharp beam through the dust. The floor was made of thick, wide planks of wood. I ran my light along the floor beneath the frame of the grinding stone, and there it was. A subtle difference. The other floorboards ran the length of the barn, but here, a rectangular section of about 4 by 6 feet was framed by perpendicular cuts. The nails were different too, newer, less rusted. It was a patch, a door. I looked around the barn. My eyes landed on a long, heavy crowbar hanging from a hook on the wall. I pulled it down. It was heavy, solid steel. I wedged the flat end into the thin crack of the outline and put my weight on it. The wood groaned in protest. "Help me," I grunted to Maya. She grabbed the bar with me, and we both threw our weight down. There was a sharp crack, then another, as the old nails gave way. With a final splintering tear, one of the boards popped up. We pried off the rest of them, revealing what was beneath. It wasn't dirt. It was a flat, dark sheet of steel, cold to the touch. In the center was a thick, cast-iron wheel, like you'd see on a vault door or a submarine hatch. It was deeply rusted, a single word barely legible in the casting. Atlas. Grandpa Arthur's last resort wasn't a barn, it was what was buried beneath it. The excitement was a jolt of electricity, chasing away the exhaustion. We had found it, whatever it was. But our excitement quickly turned to frustration. The wheel was frozen solid. We both grabbed it, our hands slipping on the gritty rust, and pulled. Nothing. It was like it was welded to the hatch. We pulled until our muscles burned and our palms were raw. It was no use. "It's stuck," Maya said, her voice laced with disappointment. She slumped down on the dusty floor, defeated. I refused to give up. We hadn't come all this way, hadn't spent our last dollar to be beaten by a rusty wheel. I looked around the workshop at the silent, waiting tools. My grandfather had been a man who worked with his hands. He wouldn't have built something he couldn't open. I scanned the workbench, my eyes passing over jars of bolts and mysterious canisters. Then I saw it. A can of penetrating oil, the label so faded it was barely readable. And next to it, a heavy rubber mallet. I grabbed them both. I sprayed the oil liberally around the hub of the wheel, watching it bubble and creep into the rust-choked mechanism. We waited. The minutes stretched out. Then, I took the mallet and began to tap firmly around the base of the wheel, rotating it a few inches at a time. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet barn. I was trying to vibrate the rust loose, to break the seal of time. After about 10 minutes of this, I stopped. "Okay," I said, my voice tight with anticipation. "Let's try again. Together." We positioned ourselves on opposite sides of the wheel, got a firm grip, and took a deep breath. "On 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. We threw our entire weight into it, pulling with a desperation born of having no other options. For a second, nothing happened. And then, with a deep, groaning screech that seemed to come from the center of the earth, the wheel moved. It was only an inch, but it moved. A surge of adrenaline hit me. "Again!" I yelled. We pulled again, and this time it turned a full rotation, the sound of grinding metal echoing in the small space. We kept turning, the resistance easing with each rotation, until finally, with a loud, satisfying clunk, the locking mechanism disengaged. We looked at each other, panting, our faces grimy with sweat and dust. A slow grin spread across Maya's face. "You did it." We found a recessed handle on the edge of the steel plate and lifted. It was incredibly heavy, but it hinged open smoothly, revealing a square of perfect blackness. A rush of cold, stale air washed over us, a smell completely different from the barn. It was the smell of concrete, canned goods, and stillness. It smelled like 1962. A steel ladder was bolted to the side, leading down into the dark. My phone was nearly dead, so I looked around the barn again. On a hook near the door hung an old kerosene lantern, its glass globe miraculously intact. There was even a can of fuel on the workbench. I filled it, lit the wick, and a warm, flickering yellow light pushed back the shadows. Holding the lantern high, I started down the ladder. "Stay there," I told Maya. "Let me see what's down here first." The ladder was cold and solid under my hands. I descended about 10 feet, and my boots touched a concrete floor. I was standing in a small, square room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. The walls were thick, poured concrete. Along one wall were wooden shelves, neatly stacked with tins and cans. I could read the faded labels: Campbell's tomato soup, Hormel chili, Del Monte peaches. There were large metal barrels of water, a military-grade first aid kit on the wall, and a hand-crank radio. It was a fallout shelter. A perfectly preserved, mid-century fallout shelter. On the opposite wall was a small, gray metal desk with a single wooden chair. And on the desk sat a heavy, dark green steel box, the kind used for ammunition or important documents. It was closed, but not locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, were several thick manila envelopes, each one sealed with a blob of dark red wax. The top envelope was thicker than the rest. Written on it in the same shaky hand as the note on the deed was a simple inscription. To my grandson. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The reason for all of it. Maya's face appeared at the top of the opening, a pale circle in the gloom. Leo? Is it safe? It's safe, I called back, my voice hoarse. Come on down. She scrambled down the ladder, her eyes wide as she took in the strange little room. She looked at the shelves of old food, then at the box in my hands. I sat down in the old wooden chair, which creaked under my weight. I took the first envelope. The wax seal crumbled into dust as I broke it. Inside was a thick stack of paper, covered in dense, elegant handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the concrete bunker. My dearest grandson, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and the world has pushed you to a place where you have no other choice. I'm sorry for that. A man hopes to leave his family a legacy of peace and prosperity, not a key to a hole in the ground. But the world is not always what we hope. I built this shelter in the fall of 1962, when the world held its breath and we all thought the end was coming. For 13 days, your grandmother and I were ready to come down here and wait for the world to burn. The crisis passed, but the fear never quite did. It taught me a lesson. There are other kinds of fallout, not just from bombs, but from greed. From men who would poison the earth for $1 and steal the ground from under your feet if you let them. Maya sat on the floor, hugging her knees, listening intently. The lantern light cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small room feel like a sacred space. This farm, the letter continued, has been in our family since my great-grandfather cleared the land. It is not just dirt and wood. It is our story. It is the sweat of generations. Around 30 years ago, a company came to Sparrow Creek. They called themselves Goliath Development. They had slick suits and big smiles. They promised jobs and progress. They wanted to buy up all the old farms along the river to build a luxury golf resort and a private lake. Some people sold. They took the money and left. I refused. This land was not for sale, so they tried to take it. I paused, my throat dry. I could feel a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just a story about the past. It felt alive. They came at me from all sides. They offered me money I couldn't refuse, then threatened me when I did. When that didn't work, they came at me through the banks. They bought up a small agricultural loan I had, a loan I was paying off on time, and they began to manipulate it. They invented fees, penalties, retroactive interest. They buried me in paperwork and legal threats. They created a fraudulent debt so large I could never hope to pay it. They were trying to foreclose, to steal the farm for the cost of a debt they themselves had invented. I fought them. I hired a lawyer, a good young man named Arthur Vance. We fought them in court for 2 years, but Goliath had deep pockets. They bled me dry. I spent everything I had. I sold the livestock, the good equipment. I was going to lose. I knew it. So I made a choice. If I couldn't win, I wouldn't let them win either. I couldn't save the farm for myself, but maybe, just maybe, I could save it for the future, for you. This shelter, my folly from 1962, became my ark. I gathered every piece of evidence I had against them, every threatening letter, every fraudulent statement, every piece of correspondence that proved their conspiracy. I hid it all down here. Then, I took the last of my savings, a few $1,000s, and I hid that too. It's not much, but I hope it's enough to give you a start. The law, as it was explained to me, is a funny thing. This fraudulent debt will sit on the property's title like a ghost, but the land is still mine, and therefore yours. They can't technically take it unless they act on the foreclosure, and for some reason, they never did. Perhaps they got what they wanted elsewhere and forgot about this small, stubborn plot of land. Or perhaps they are just waiting. I am leaving you with a terrible burden, and I know it. You have two paths. The evidence in this box is enough to expose them, to fight them. Arthur Vance, if he is still practicing, made me a promise that he would help my family if the time ever came. But fighting Goliath will be a war. They are rich and ruthless. The other path is to walk away. Leave the key in the lock, let the barn rot, and let the ghosts of this place rest. Perhaps that is the wiser choice. I do not know. I am just an old farmer who tried to hold on to what was his. All I can give you is this choice, the choice I never had. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you, the grandchild I would never meet. Know that I believed in you, your loving grandfather, Arthur Miller. The letter ended. I folded it carefully and placed it back on the desk. The silence in the vault was heavier now, filled with the weight of my grandfather's words. The flickering flame of the lantern seemed small and fragile against the immense darkness of the past. For a moment, I had felt a sense of connection, of lineage. Now all I felt was a crushing, suffocating weight. This wasn't a treasure chest. It was a box of dynamite with a lit fuse. Maya looked at me, her eyes shimmering in the lantern light. "So we're not just poor?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're in a war we didn't even know about?" I didn't have an answer. I leaned forward, my head in my hands. The relief of finding this place, the brief, shining hope that we were saved, had evaporated. It was all a mirage. We hadn't stumbled into a sanctuary. We had stumbled into the heart of a conflict that had ruined our grandfather and lain dormant for 30 years. And now it was ours. I felt a wave of despair so profound it was almost dizzying. I was 18 years old. I knew how to bus tables and cram for a history exam. I knew how to make sure Maya did her homework and braid her hair, sort of. I didn't know how to fight a multi-million-dollar corporation. I didn't know how to navigate a legal system that had already crushed a man far stronger and wiser than me. My grandfather had left me a choice, but it felt like a trap. Fight and lose everything, just like he did. Or run and carry the shame of that cowardice for the rest of our lives, knowing we had abandoned his legacy. Some choice. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, a bitter, humorless sound. Here we were, sitting in a concrete box under a tool barn, in the middle of nowhere, with a ghost's mission and a handful of dust. Mark had kicked us out, and we had fallen right down a rabbit hole into a forgotten history that was now threatening to swallow us whole. "Leo?" Maya's voice was soft. She had moved closer and put her hand on my arm. "What are we going to do?" I looked at her scared, earnest face, and the full weight of my responsibility crashed down on me. She was depending on me to know, to have a plan. But I was just as lost as she was. I felt like a little kid dressed in his father's oversized suit, pretending to be a grown-up. The confidence I had faked at the bus station was gone, stripped away by the raw, unvarnished truth in that letter. I stood up and started pacing the tiny room, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The shelter felt less like a refuge and more like a cage. My grandfather thought he was leaving me a weapon, but what good is a weapon in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to fight? What if I made the wrong choice? What if I fought and dragged Maya through years of legal battles, only to lose? We'd be worse off than we were now. At least now we had ignorance. We could walk away from this, pretend we never found it. The thought was tempting, so powerfully, seductively tempting. To just take whatever cash was in that box, get on a bus, and disappear. Find a small apartment in some anonymous town and start over. A clean slate. No ghosts, no Goliaths, no legacy to uphold. Just survival. Wasn't that my primary job? To ensure Maya was safe and fed and had a roof over her head. Fighting this battle felt like a reckless gamble with her future. But the alternative felt like a betrayal. I could see my grandfather's face in my mind, a man I'd only ever seen in one faded photograph, his expression stern but his eyes kind. I believed in you, his words echoed in the silence of the vault. Have you ever been given a responsibility you felt completely unprepared for? A moment where you had to grow up in an instant, where the path forward was terrifying and the path back was unthinkable. It's a heavy, lonely feeling, standing at a crossroads like that. If you know what I'm talking about, if you've ever had to carry that kind of weight, I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people who have faced those moments. Let me know in the comments about a time you had to be stronger than you ever thought you could be. Your story matters. I took a deep breath, the stale, cool air of the vault filling my lungs. Pacing wasn't helping. We needed information. We needed to know what we were really up against. Let's see what else is in the box, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We sat back down at the metal desk, and I pulled out the next envelope. It was heavy and thick. As I opened it, a cascade of old bills fell onto the desk. They were $100 bills, the old style, smaller-faced ones. They smelled of dust and time. We counted them. $3,200. To us, it might as well have been $1 million. It was a lifeline. It was food. It was a generator. It was time. It was the fuel my grandfather knew we would need. Maya stared at the stacks of money, her eyes wide. Is this real? It's real, I said, a sense of awe in my voice. He had thought of everything. The next envelope was even thicker, bound with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped as I touched it. This was the evidence. It was meticulously organized. There were copies of threatening letters from Goliath's lawyers. There were bank statements with circled, inexplicable fees. There were sworn affidavits from 2 other local farmers who had been pushed out by similar tactics, both of whom had been too scared to fight. And there was a series of letters between my grandfather and the company, showing their initial friendly offers souring into outright hostility. It was a cold, calculated campaign of financial warfare. He had documented his own destruction. Seeing it all laid out, the sheer methodical cruelty of it extinguished the temptation to run. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about justice. It was about the fact that people, rich and powerful people, thought they could just erase a man, his family, his entire history, with paperwork. The last envelope contained only a single, folded sheet of notepaper. On it was a name and a phone number. Arthur Vance, Esquire. And underneath, a note. He will remember the promise. My phone was down to 4%. It was now or never. I didn't know the area code, so I had to guess based on the location. I dialed the number, my finger hovering over the call button. "What if he's not there anymore?" Maya whispered. "What if he doesn't remember?" "Only one way to find out," I said, and pressed the button. It rang once, twice, a third time. I was about to hang up when a voice answered. It was a quiet, calm, elderly voice. "Hello?" "Hello," I said, my own voice cracking slightly. I'm looking for Arthur Vance." "You found him," the voice said. There was a pause. "To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Leo Miller. I'm Arthur Miller's grandson." The silence on the other end of the line was so long, so absolute, that I thought the call had dropped. My battery icon blinked red. 1%. "Mr. Vance?" I said, my voice tight with panic. "Are you still there?" "Yes, son," he finally said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Yes, I'm here. I've been waiting for this call for 30 years. A wave of relief washed over me so powerful I had to sit down. He remembered. Your grandfather, Mr. Vance continued, was one of the finest men I ever knew. Stubborn as a mule, but his heart was pure gold. They did him a great injustice. I found the box, I said, my words tumbling out. The letters, the evidence. He said you'd know what to do. He did he? The lawyer chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. He always had more faith in me than I had in myself. Listen, son, the situation is complicated. That fraudulent debt is still on the title. Goliath Development is bigger and more powerful than ever. They go by a different name now, GDI Global, but it's the same beast. For years, they've had a standing offer on the books to resolve the debt by purchasing the property. It's a pittance, less than 5 cents on the dollar of what that land is actually worth. But for them, it's a way to clean up their books and finally get their hands on the last piece of the puzzle. He paused. They'll see the title has transferred to you upon your 18th birthday. They'll be in touch. They'll offer you the easy way out. What's the other way? I asked, my heart pounding. The hard way, he said. We use your grandfather's evidence. We don't just defend against the foreclosure. We countersue for fraud, conspiracy, and punitive damages. We expose 30 years of corruption. It will be long. It will be expensive. And they will fight you with everything they have. They will try to bury you, just like they buried your grandfather. My phone screen went black. The battery was dead. The line was gone. But I had my answer. The easy way or the hard way. Run or fight. We spent the next 2 days in a strange state of limbo. Using a fraction of the precious cash, we walked back into Oak Haven and bought supplies. Bottled water, non-perishable food, blankets, flashlights, and a cheap prepaid cell phone. The walk back to the farm felt different this time. It was no longer a journey into the unknown. It was a return to our front line. We set up a makeshift camp in the barn, the safest and driest place on the property. We cleaned a corner, swept away the thickest layers of dust, and laid out the blankets. The barn became our fortress, the vault our secret. We spent the daylight hours exploring the land, our land. We walked the perimeter, tracing the old fence lines swallowed by forest. We found the creek that gave the area its name, a clear, fast-running stream at the back of the property. We stood where the old farmhouse porch used to be and tried to imagine what it looked like. We were putting down roots, even as the ground beneath us felt profoundly unstable. On the 3rd day, it happened. A sleek, black sedan, impossibly clean, made its way slowly up our overgrown driveway. It looked like a shark cruising through a swamp. It parked near the barn, and a man in a crisp, dark suit got out. He was young, his hair perfectly styled, his shoes gleaming despite the dusty ground. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Leo Miller?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. I was standing by the barn door. I just nodded, my hands in my pockets, trying to look casual. Maya was watching from the shadows inside the barn. "My name is Jonathan Finch," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "I'm with the Asset Resolution Department for GDI Global. I believe you're familiar with our long-standing interest in this property." He spoke in a smooth, practiced cadence, as if he were explaining a cell phone plan. "Look, I'll be direct. This property has a significant lien against it, dating back quite some time. It's a messy situation. My clients are prepared to offer you a generous settlement to clear the title. We'll forgive the entirety of the outstanding debt and, on top of that, offer you a cash payment of $75,000. All you have to do is sign the land over to us. It's a clean break. You walk away with a fresh start, cash in your pocket, and this whole headache is behind you. $75,000. The number hung in the air. It was an astronomical sum. It was an apartment. It was a car. It was college for Maya. It was safety, security, and an end to this nightmare. It was the easy way out, served up on a silver platter. I could feel the pull of it, the logical, sensible part of my brain screaming at me to take it. Run. Be smart. Protect your sister. You get a new life, Finch said, as if reading my mind. No more squatting in a derelict barn. You can give your sister a real home. That was the line that did it. The casual, condescending way he said it. The assumption that we were just squatters, that this place wasn't ours, that home was something you could buy. He didn't see a legacy. He saw a line item on a balance sheet. He didn't see my grandfather's struggle. He saw an asset to be resolved. I'll need to think about it, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Of course, he said, his smile widening. He thought he had me. The offer is on the table for 48 hours. He handed me a business card and a thick folder of documents. My number's there. Call me when you've made the sensible decision. He got back in his car, and with a quiet crunch of gravel, he was gone, leaving behind only the scent of expensive cologne and the echo of his offer. That night was the longest of my life. The $75,000 felt like a living presence in the barn. It was a ghost of a future I could have, a safe, easy future. Maya and I didn't talk for hours. We just sat, listening to the crickets, the weight of the decision pressing down on us. I thought about what that money could do. I could get us a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. Maya could go to a good school, make friends, have a normal teenage life. No more trash bags, no more sleeping on the floor of a barn. Wasn't that my duty as her brother, as her guardian? But then I thought about my grandfather, alone, documenting his own ruin in a dusty concrete hole. I thought about his words. This is not just dirt and wood. It is our story. If we took the money, our story would end here. It would be a story of defeat. The Millers were the people who finally gave up and sold out. Goliath would win. Their 30-year war of attrition would be over. They'd tear down the barn, plow over the fields, and erase every trace of us, just like they'd always planned. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice quiet in the darkness. What are you going to do, Leo? I don't know, I admitted, the words tasting like failure. It's so much money, May. It would fix everything, right now. No, it wouldn't, she said, and her voice was so firm it startled me. I looked at her. In the dim light from our flashlight, I could see she wasn't a little kid anymore. Her face was set, determined. It would fix the money part, but it wouldn't fix the other part. The part where they hurt Grandpa. The part where they think they can just show up and buy us off because we're kids and we're scared. She stood up and walked to the barn door, looking out at the silhouette of the ruined farmhouse against the starry sky. Grandpa didn't build a vault and hide evidence for 30 years so we could be the ones to surrender. He did it so we could be the ones to fight back. She turned to face me, her eyes blazing. This is our home, Leo. Even if it's broken, maybe especially because it's broken, it's our job to fix it. In that moment, she was stronger than me, braver than me. She saw it with a clarity that my fear had clouded. The choice was never about the money. It was about who we were going to be. I stood up and walked over to her. You're right, I said. The words felt solid, real. The doubt and fear were still there, but they were smaller now, crowded out by a surge of purpose. You're right. The next morning, I used our new phone to make 2 calls. The first was to Jonathan Finch, "We've considered your offer," I said, my voice steady. "We're rejecting it." There was a moment of stunned silence. "You're making a monumental mistake, kid," he said, his voice losing all its manufactured friendliness. It was cold and sharp now. "You have no idea what you're getting into." "Maybe not," I said, "but we're not selling." I hung up before he could reply. The second call was to Arthur Vance. "Mr. Vance," I said, "it's Leo Miller. We're in."
"We want to fight." There was a warm, satisfied sound on the other end of the line.
"Good," he said. "I was hoping you'd say that. Now the real work begins." The work was slow. The work was hard. It was nothing like a movie montage. The legal battle was a glacier moving at an agonizing pace. Arthur Vance, true to his word, filed our countersuit. GDI Global responded with an army of lawyers. They filed motions to dismiss. They buried us in requests for discovery. They tried every trick in the book to drain our resources and our will. Arthur, who was semi-retired and ran his practice from a small office above a bakery in Oak Haven, was a bulldog. He worked for a fraction of his usual fee, funded by the cash from the vault, which he called the Miller War Chest. While the lawyers fought on paper, Maya and I fought on the land. We used the money from the vault sparingly, with a discipline born of necessity. We bought a small, used generator, which gave us power for a few hours each night. We bought tools, lumber, and nails. We started with the barn, patching the holes in the walls, replacing the rotted boards, and cleaning out decades of accumulated junk. We scrubbed the grime from the high windows, and for the first time in half a century, sunlight filled the entire space. It became our home. We slept there, we ate there, we planned our future there. Then we turned our attention to the land. We bought a second-hand push mower, and I spent days cutting paths through the waist-high weeds, slowly reclaiming the yard around the barn. We found the remains of my grandmother's garden, a few stubborn rose bushes still blooming amidst the thorns. We cleared the patch and planted our own small garden with seeds we bought in town: tomatoes, squash, beans. Tilling that soil, feeling the earth in my hands, felt like an act of defiance. We weren't just occupying the land, we were connecting with it. Slowly, the community that had forgotten us began to remember. The old man from the gas station, whose name was Cal, drove up one day with a tractor and, without saying much, spent an entire afternoon mowing our front field. His wife brought over a hot casserole that night. "Arthur Miller was a good man," she said simply. "It's good to have Millers back on this land." We learned that our grandfather hadn't been a recluse. He'd been a pillar of the community before Goliath had isolated and broken him. Other neighbors started stopping by. A woman who ran a farm stand down the road gave us fresh eggs. A retired carpenter helped me figure out how to brace a sagging beam in the barn. They shared stories about our grandparents, painting a picture of the family we'd never known. We weren't just two kids in a barn anymore. We were part of a place. We were part of its history. During this time, I felt myself changing. The fear was still a constant companion, a low hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. But it was no longer in charge. Every board I nailed, every weed I pulled, was a small victory. I was learning to fix things, to build things. I was providing for my sister, not with a check from our enemies, but with my own two hands. I was becoming the man my grandfather had believed I could be. Home, I realized, wasn't a place you were given. It was a thing you made. You made it with sweat, and with love, and with stubbornness. You made it by choosing to stay and fight when it was easier to run. The legal fight dragged on for almost a year. It culminated not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in a series of tense depositions. GDI's lawyers tried to paint me as an opportunistic squatter, but Arthur Vance was brilliant. He used my grandfather's meticulous records to corner their executives, catching them in lie after lie. The key was the affidavits from the other farmers. It proved a pattern of racketeering. Faced with a federal investigation and a public relations nightmare, GDI folded. They didn't admit guilt, of course. Companies like that never do. But they agreed to a settlement. It wasn't a lottery win. We didn't become millionaires. But the terms were everything we had fought for. First, the fraudulent debt was wiped from the record, declared null and void. The title to the land was cleared, free of any and all encumbrances. It was ours, truly, irrevocably ours. Second, they paid a settlement. After Arthur's fees, it was enough to pay the back taxes on the property and set up a trust for Maya's education. And it was enough for us to start rebuilding the farmhouse, not as a mansion, but as a home. The day Arthur called with the news, I just stood in the field, the phone pressed to my ear, and looked at the barn, our home. Maya ran out, and I picked her up and swung her around, both of us laughing with a relief so pure it felt like we could fly. We had won. My grandfather had won. It's been 2 years since that day. The farmhouse isn't finished, but it's livable. The roof is new, the windows are in, and the porch is solid. We did most of the work ourselves, with help from Cal and our other neighbors. The barn is my workshop now, filled with my own projects. Maya is thriving in the local high school. She's on the debate team, of course. Arthur Vance comes over for dinner every Sunday. The land is healing. The fields are clear, and we lease most of them to a neighboring organic farmer. The creek runs clean and cold. It's quiet here, but it's a good quiet. It's the sound of peace. Sometimes I walk down to the barn and I run my hand over the grinding stone that still sits in the corner. I think about the choice we faced down in that concrete vault. The easy way or the hard way. We chose the hard way, and it was the best decision I've ever made. My grandfather left us more than a piece of land and a box of evidence. He left us a choice: to run from our past or to build a future from its foundations. He gave us the chance to discover who we were. Every one of us gets choices like that. Maybe not a vault under a barn, but a moment where we have to decide what we stand for. A moment to choose between what is easy and what is right. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with a choice you've had to make in your own life, hit that subscribe button. And please, in the comments, tell me about a choice that defined you. I'll be reading every one. Because in the end, these are the stories that matter. These are the legacies we build for ourselves.